This is ContraZoom,
where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Rachel Ho.
Toronto has been the primary filming location for hundreds of movies. Between local governments giving tax credits, our weaker dollar being great for stretching the margins, plenty of studio space, and easily granted permits for filming on locations. Add in a hotbed for creatives, actors, writers, and directors, and plenty of skilled crews mean it's easy to bring American money and stars up north and filling out the rest of the production with locals. Best Picture winners like The Shape of Water in Chicago utilize notable landmarks. Suicide Squad, the bad one, tore up Yonge and Dundas Square. X-Men used Casa Loma for Xavier's school. The Resident Evil franchise managed to convince the city to allow City Hall to stand in for the evil Umbrella Corporation. And Mean Girls showed off the rich side of the city by using the bridle path for Regina George's mansion house. But Toronto has also played itself plenty of times too. With the recent release of Pixar's Turning Red and it being set in Ontario's capital and Canada's largest city, we thought we would talk about the movies and that movie and others that showcase Toronto in all of its glory. There are Canadian classics such as Take This Waltz, Kids in the Hall Brain Candy, I've Heard the Mermaid Sing, Going Down the Road, and just about every David Cronenberg like Crash, the good one, Exotica, Dead Ringers, Videodrome, and Cosmopolis among the many. We've narrowed down a select set of films that highlight the city that we love. I think we need to start the discussion off, though, with the most famous and notable movie that has ever taken place in Toronto, and that is the Hayden Christensen and Emma Roberts movie, Little Italy.
Little Italy is not big enough for me and you.
When did all of this go from crazy?
What'd you put in the pizza today?
Always the same, the best.
That's not oregano.
To batshit insane.
Bye-bye. I'll get you for this, you stroots.
Have you seen this movie?
I haven't. That's the pizza one, right?
It is, yes.
The pizza one. I'll say Hayden Christensen lives in Uxbridge, and I grew up not far away from Uxbridge.
Really?
Yeah, he lives there. I think he still lives there, but like apparently he bought a farm or something. I don't know, up in Uxbridge. And yeah, I went there for the first time a couple years ago, but I grew up very, very near to Uxbridge. Just never went. Also, I want to pick you up on something. The fact that the first time you said Toronto, you said Toronto. And
no, I did not. No, I didn't. I haven't been away that long.
Listen to the tape. All right. When you go back to record this, when you go back to edit this, you're going to see the very first time you said Toronto, you said Toronto.
Oh, that's embarrassing. That's so embarrassing. I might
us will
have
be
to
wrong,
edit in the audio here for proof.
That'll be a really funny cut. It'll just be like, hello, Toronto.
Toronto?
Toronto.
Toronto?
No, you definitely said Toronto, which made me laugh a little bit. But
oh no,
yeah.
Oh no. Yes,
I'll say it was
I've
funny.
Been too long now. It's so weird now that I live out in Vancouver and I tell people that I'm from Toronto. They're all like, "Oh yeah, out east." I'm like, "What? Toronto's not east." Like, I guess
isn't it weird that we say that though? Like
speaking, it is east, but it's not out east.
But that's like I think a very American thing because we're on the East Coast. Like we're lined up with the East Coast of America. Yeah. So I think that's why we said, and also we're in the Eastern time zone.
Yeah.
Whereas the Maritimes have their own time zone. So I get that. I still say like, you know, people, I rag on the West Coast a lot because I'm like, I'm just not a West Coast person. But I go, yeah. I'm like a fairly East Coast person, but then I have to remind myself like Toronto is not actually East Coast, not in Canada anyways. It's like we're not considered East Coast. But if you line us up with the Americans, then yes, we are East Coast.
So then to flip it, if I was to say, I'm going out west, what starts being west for you?
Alberta.
Okay, that's what I would do as well because, you know, Saskatchewan's kind of everyone forgets
They're
about
prairie
it.
provinces.
Manitoba isn't really west; it's kind of central.
No, I consider Saskatchewan and Manitoba to be like prairie provinces. So if you're saying like, oh, I'm going to the prairies,
yeah.
So I would say Manitoba, Saskatchewan. Then west is Alberta.
Okay,
and BC is the westest of the west.
Yes. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. We are not talking about Little Italy. I watched the trailer just out of curiosity, and my God, I barely made it through the 2 minutes of that. What a terrible looking movie that is, and it doesn't even look like Toronto, even though it's supposed to take place in Little Italy in Toronto. But yeah, the focus of this conversation is the release of Turning Red, And so we thought we'd kind of talk about this movie a little bit, review it a little bit, and talk about its Toronto-ness, and then move on and sort of talk about other movies that we sort of highlight that show off different aspects and sides of the city that we love. Neither of us are originally from Toronto, but we have both lived there. I lived there a good chunk of my life. You no longer live there, but you visit there often. It's a great city. I love going there, and it's always fun when you can watch an American movie and be like, oh, hey, I recognize that. That's the Gardiner Expressway or Casa Loma or whatever other, notable landmark that they're using, and trying to disguise the fact that it's not actually Toronto when it's, it's supposed to be New York or Pittsburgh or Chicago or whatever other city that you want it to be.
I'm Maylin Lee. I wear what I want, say what I want, 24/7, 365. I know, it's a lot. But I don't got time to mess around. Je me fromage blanc. All about that hustle, am I right? Poor town. This is gonna be the best year ever. And nothing's gonna get in my way.
Turning Red feels like the first movie since another movie we're going to talk about later, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, where its Toronto-ness is very integral to the plot. And I would say that's due to a few different reasons. One, the writer and director Domi Shi is from Toronto, so obviously she would, utilize it to the best of its ability. But I think Turning Red also does a great job of highlighting the multicultural nature of the city, and especially the very large Chinese population we have, not only in Canada, but Toronto as a whole, where we've got multiple Chinatowns. And it is a massive section of the city, especially the one along Dundas Street. And this movie really sort of highlights that area of the city and makes it a character, to the point where there's numerous scenes that take place there. And then the final climactic scene takes place in the Sky Dome, notably not the Rogers Center, but the Sky Dome. So you've now seen this movie, I want to say like 2 months ago. You've even had the chance to interview Domi Shi twice, I believe, since this movie has come out. Are you sick and tired of talking about this movie by now?
I'm not, because it is, I will say, for me, it is not top tier Pixar. Like, it's not one of my favorite Pixar movies, but I thoroughly enjoy kind of what it represents. And the reason I interviewed Domi Shi twice was, the first time was just as like a general promo interview about, the movie. And then the second time I caught her was because after the movie was released, and it was because of some of the unfortunate backlash that the movie somehow generated. Like, who knew that this was going to be the movie that turned film Twitter into just an even greater cesspool than it already is. And so that's why I interviewed her twice, was just to do a piece on the kind of, I guess, the reactions and some of the reviews. There's a very notorious review, but we don't need to draw too much attention to that. But I like, what you said of showing the diversity. Like, that was a sticking point I've seen online of people being like, I thought it was supposed to be Toronto. I thought it was supposed to be Canadian. Like, basically saying like, why aren't there enough white people in this? And it's like, well, if you actually go to Toronto and like you grew up in Toronto, and especially if you went to school somewhere like Chinatown, like down on the Spadina Dundas Chinatown area, that is what Toronto looks like. Like, Toronto is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. And even other places I've been to where they say that they're very multicultural, it's like, to me, it doesn't feel like that, because I guess we've just been around kind of peak multiculturalism. And so other cities like London, like, don't really compare in the same way. One thing that I found was really interesting from when I was talking to Domi was about the diversity. And so, because it's an animated movie, she really pushed hard it was like extra money and extra time to make sure that even like background characters, little animated characters in the back, were of different races. Like, it wasn't just going to be all the same. And it wasn't even just about the racial makeup of May's classmates. It was about like tall and big and, just kind of different shapes and sizes of people to make it a bit more realistic. And typically in animation, I think what she says is, like, in animation, nothing is for free. Like, you have to create and build everything. So rather than just copy and pasting the same figure and then, kind of animating that way, which is obviously a lot quicker. She was very determined to make sure that no, like they're going to take the time. And even if that person is only shown in the background for like half a second, she wanted to make sure that, you know, the hallways of the school that May and her friends go to is filled with just a bunch of different type of people, that the streets of Toronto were filled with a bunch of different people. And I thought that was really cool, because I never thought about that for animation, actually, that like it's very different to live action where it's just getting a bunch of extras. But this is actually, you have to have somebody, an animator, go in and take the time to really create all those people, all those little, you know, images. Whereas it would have been quicker for them to just do like I always think of like the stormtroopers in Star Wars, like a copy and paste CGI stormtroopers like that. So I thought that was really cool. And I like that Domi specifically made sure to emphasize that about the city.
Yeah. And I guess anyone who hasn't been to Toronto before, like if I know someone is visiting and they're asking for recommendations, I would get to the point where I would say Chinatown is a good tourist place to go. You know, if you like eating dim sum, you go down to Chinatown, go down to Spadina and Dundas Street and have some dim sum there and see what the authentic experience, as much as you can get away from, you know, going to a Chinese family's house or going directly to China. Toronto is one of the best places that you can get the authentic experience, especially in cuisine, anywhere in the world. And that's not just for Chinese culture. That's just about for any culture, because there's so many different communities that live and thrive in the city. It's so easy. You think it's like when people ask me about the city, I'm like, think of a style, a cuisine of food. There is an entire neighborhood that serves only that. You can get that. And if you love
Toronto's
Chinese
pretty
food,
impressive in that.
Yeah. And if you love Chinese food, and you want like a great buffet and you want some Peking duck, whatever you want, whatever you're thinking about with some dumplings, go to Chinatown in Toronto and you'll get some of the best that you can think of. Obviously, there's other places. If you're a local, you know that Markham's a great place to go for Chinese food, places like that. But Toronto, if you're staying in downtown Toronto, walk through, experience the sites, experience, you know, all those outdoor fruit and veggie markets that they have, explore the interesting shops that they have, all the funness that you can have there. It's such a great part of the city and I love it. And it's something that no longer living in the city I really miss.
I'm just going to say, you already touched on Markham, but Chinatown downtown does not have the best Chinese food in the GTA. I'm just going to put it out there. It's not the greatest anymore. I think it is because it became more of a tourist destination. And also, you know, there are still it is still Chinatown in terms of like, there are a lot of Chinese people who live in that area, but it is an aging community. And, you know, the newer families, the newer arrivals, they are going up north to a suburb called Markham, which is just, I don't know. I was thinking suburban, which is just north of Toronto. And that is truly where you can get some of the best Chinese food, in my opinion. Like, and it's, initially, like when I was growing up, it was mostly Cantonese food because the population in Toronto and GTA was mostly from Hong Kong. But now that there's a lot more people from mainland China, you get a lot of Shanghai food, a lot of, just more northern cuisines, which is really cool, actually, because and Scarborough is actually a really good place for Chinese food as well. Just for anyone who's listening who comes to Toronto and they want to get like actual good Chinese food, go there. Go there. It's Chinatown downtown's not the greatest. So
I'm curious to ask you, as a Chinese Canadian, how did you feel about the types, the way the representation of May's family was? Because I think we get throughout the film, we sort of get this great look into what family means in the Chinese community, the close bond that May has with her mother, and then eventually with her aunties and her grandma, and when they all come into the city and stuff like that. I was just wondering, did the way it was portrayed, did it sort of feel accurate to either yourself or other people that you know that also are of Chinese Canadian descent, and was it represented accurately?
Yes and no. I think that the beginning bits, like the idea that May feels the need to get really good grades and be kind of the perfect daughter, that's a very common thing. I think but amongst like a lot of immigrant families, to be fair, not just Chinese families or Asian families. I think there's a pressure when you are, the immigrant kid. You're the first generation born in Canada, or you're very young when you came over. And there's a pressure that you do very well, especially in school, because education is a very it's very much so prioritized within Asian communities, East Asian communities in particular, but South Asian as well. And so in that sense, like the idea of May always wanting to be perfect and wanting to do good by her parents, I think is a very, very real thing. And, I always think, I think every kid, it doesn't matter who you are. Like, I think every kid, they just want to please their parents. Maybe it's a bit more emphasized in Asian culture because we do have kind of, there's a big emphasis is also put on like respecting your elders and things like that and your ancestors. So maybe it's a bit more put upon for us, but there is amongst the specificity that Domi puts in that is about Chinese culture and that there is a great universality. I can't speak right now, to it, which I really appreciate. And I think when I say no, the reason is because it like Turning Red does kind of turn into a bit of a borderline fantasy movie at some point. And I mean, I think that that's kind of played as a bit more, it's fantastical and it's a bit more like, what's the word am I like for it? It's that idea of looking at like, oh, the Far East and like, look at how, mystical, that's the word, mystical our culture is and stuff like that. And that is a bit of an exaggeration and a bit of kind of Pixar Disney magic put in. But I'm not like, I don't think it takes away from the movie at all. I think that that's kind of what makes Pixar movie and Disney movies, that's what makes them, because they do add in those little elements that are otherworldly. And this one just in particular kind of looks at a very specific culture that is more close to me than probably any Pixar movie or Disney movie, to be fair, has ever been. Like, I know that Mulan was the first kind of Asian focused Disney venture back in the 90s, and then they did a live action one, but that one is more of, it's a folk story from actual China, whereas this one, I think what is unique about it is it's about a girl who's Asian but is growing up in a Western country and in a very Western city. So it's in that sense, like I think it's accurate, and there are obviously some elements that they take a bit of a grand look at it, but that it's a movie. That's kind of what it's meant to be, and it's a kids movie too. At the end of the day,
it's interesting. I found the final act of the movie, for all that it was trying to pay homage to Domi's Chinese roots, I found the third act reminded me a lot of Japanese culture. It has a very anime style to the big fight sequences. There clearly is a reference to Godzilla. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I don't want to really spoil too much about it, but there's clearly an homage to the Godzilla films, which is Japanese. And so it's just sort of interesting that Domi was very comfortable portraying all the Chinese cultural aspects that she wanted to include in the first, 2/3 of the movie, and then the final third just felt very Japanese to me. Did that come across to you at all?
I mean, I would say the whole movie, like the animation style is very Japanese anime. And, for Chinese kids growing up, I mean, we saw the same, like the Sailor Moons and the Dragon Ball Z and all that kind of stuff. Like we grew up with that stuff too, which is very Japanese. But I know, again, speaking with Domi, it was like, I know that those are the things that she watched growing up, and like Totoro and a lot of, we had something, there's like Ding Dong and Hello Kitty and all those kind of things. She grew up with that. And that was, especially at that time when we were growing up, not to say that there is obviously a very big difference between being Chinese and Japanese. But when you're growing up, it's just kind of like they do bleed together in the sense, like in a Chinese mall, you'll find Sanrio stuff all the time. Like, so it's not that, so it's kind of like, it makes sense to me because that just would have been what she grew up with in the same way that that's what I grew up with too. And yeah, so I think like she definitely borrowed from that animation style, and it was very intentional to do it that way because the whole movie is meant to be, through the eyes of a preteen Asian girl. And so that's why everything's so bubbly and anime-y, because it would have been set in 2000. Oh, when did she set this movie? 2002, 2003, around there. Yeah. That's the kind of influence that a character like May, someone like myself, someone like Domi, we would have been exposed to that kind of stuff. And those, might have been the things that we gravitated towards as young girls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did want to bring it back to the multicultural aspect, because I loved how May's friend group was diverse, because you had May, who is Chinese, and then I'm gonna have to bring up the names here between them all.
Abby was Korean, who's my favorite. She's adorable with her purple overalls. And then there's Miriam, who I think is the white girl, and there's a South Asian girl whose name I can't. Priya, I think. Yeah, Priya.
But then also they had their friend or the classmate Tyler, who looked a little ambiguous, and then you see his parents later on, and it looked like he was probably a mix of West
Caribbean.
Indian and black or something like that. You heard the dad speak it and sound like he had some sort of a Caribbean accent, whether it was Trini or something else, which is very Toronto as well, I really sort of appreciated that, and I was able to sort of see a lot of my classmates being represented in this way, which was very interesting and nice to see.
I think Domi did it in such a great way. Like, I think she did it in a way that, like, if you grew up in Toronto area or like the GTA, it feels very real and very like authentic to what you would have grown up with. And I know maybe for people outside of Toronto, it seems a bit far-fetched, and it seems like, they're just kind of tick boxing a bunch of diversity and representation, inclusion and all that nonsense. Like, I shouldn't call it nonsense, but like the tick box exercise is nonsense. It's nonsense when it becomes like a put upon performative thing. But fact is that's just what, especially downtown Toronto, that's what it looked like then and continues to look like today. And I grew up in the suburbs. Like, I was born in Toronto, but I grew up in the suburbs. And when I was growing up, it was still a fairly predominantly white community. And nowadays, as you can see it, like the surrounding suburbs of Toronto are getting more and more diverse, as from even when I was a kid. So it is a very real thing that I find kind of funny that people didn't think was real. Like, I found it kind of funny that people who were outside of Toronto or outside of Canada thought that's not real. Like, they're just doing that because they want to show like multicultural stuff. And it's like, no, but that's actually how it was.
What did you think of the final big boss sequence taking place inside the Sky Dome, as someone who is a avid Jays fan?
I love that it was the Sky Dome. It would have been very annoying if they, for whatever reason, had to call it the Rogers Center. It was fun. There was a friend of mine who I met on Twitter. He was like, "There's no way the Sky Dome has that much chalk to make the big circle." I was like, that's a good point. But I loved it. I mean, I remember watching the Backstreet Boys there when I was a kid, so it was kind of funny to see it that way. Although I will say, when they did the concerts, like, when did I go to watch the Backstreet Boys? Maybe it was the winter, because I don't remember the dome being open when I went to go watch the Backstreet Boys. But I loved it. It's fun. Like, I think it's, again, like you said, it's called like it looks like a Godzilla kind of thing, or like a King Kong type thing. And we don't usually see Toronto in the center of something like that because, kind of pressed with the whole episode is the fact that Toronto usually is disguised as a different city. And there's not as many movies to pick from that show Toronto for Toronto. So something like the Sky Dome, they would generally hide it because that is a very particular thing of Toronto, and you can't really say that, that's Yankee Stadium, because clearly that's not Yankee Stadium. So it's nice to see, like, it's really cool to see that you have like a giant red panda come in and destroy Sky Dome. Yeah, it does need a renovation, to be fair, and they are working on it now. But
the renovation thing at the end, that was a little too on the nose. Where I'm like, man, they've been saying that they're going to do renos for like 20 years now.
They are doing it now. I mean, they're doing it now, kind of.
They have been bit by bit every year trying to upgrade stuff. It was so funny when the giant red panda attacks Sky Dome, and it like rips the roof open. All I could think about was like, oh my God, this is a custom roof. The company no longer exists. Every time that there's issues with the roof, it's such a heartache because it takes them forever to basically build the parts they need to fix the roof tracks. And here they are just ripping the roof open.
Well, that's why at the end they had to raise all that money because
that was a great visual gag where it says that they need to raise $10,000, and then the camera pans up. It says $100 million. I'm like, that's more accurate.
Much more accurate. Yeah. Even for 2002, 2003, it was much more accurate.
Yeah. Now it'd probably be like $2 billion.
I can't even imagine how much it's going to cost them to do this renovation. I think they are looking to just build a completely new site for the Jays to play in, but which seems like a shame. But
yeah, that's a whole other bucket of worms where no idea what's going to happen with that. Yeah, like you don't want to lose that downtown real estate that's just outside Union Station, that's central to everything.
The location is the best. Yeah, like that
is.
It's the perfect location to put a stadium in. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what they're like. I mean, there's a reason why they haven't just said we're going to go build a new one, because like, where are you going to put it? So unless you say they're not going to play in Toronto for a couple years while they build this new stadium. And to be fair, they didn't play in Toronto for a couple years. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Yeah, that would be something that would be a real shame. I know that they've talked about different locations, and every time that they do, it just like it just wouldn't be the same, whether it's Downsview Park or wherever. It just would not work out.
Logically, it just doesn't make sense. Like right now, you're right downtown, and it's easy for everybody from like people who live downtown and also the surrounding suburbs to get in to watch games. Like it's relatively easy. It's not cheap, but it is easy for families to get in. And if you move it somewhere else, it's not going to be like, I mean, they need ticket sales. So who knows if like, and I mean, the Jays are good right now, but they had many years where the Jays were not good. And so if you make it in such a tough spot to get into, but anyways, I digress. I think we're going down a Blue Jays wormhole here.
Yeah, a little bit. But this isn't the first time that Domichi has made her film central to Toronto, and previously her short film Bow also took place in Toronto, and that was sort of like much more fun teasery, where like if you didn't recognize the landmarks in the background, you may not have noticed it as much, even though it really was central to Domi's experience in wanting to tell the story of this young boy growing up and leaving the mother's nest and all that sort of stuff. But she really sort of took it the next step further with this film, and it was really great to see it, and nice to see so many people talk about Toronto in a positive way, being depicted on screen, and not just, hey, look how they managed to convince everyone that this was actually New York or Chicago or wherever.
I do wish, I mean, we're going to get into the other movies and like the different types of the city, but I do kind of wish that they would just do a movie kind of like a New York City Wall Street type movie. Like they did American Psycho, they filmed that here in Toronto. Mm-hmm. But I wish that they would just do like one about like Bay Street, kind of like it's still Toronto, but it would just be like a Bay Street-y type thing. And it would be very like set right in the financial district and use all that. Cause I think that would be interesting.
There is a movie. One of the ones that I had kind of suggested to you is one called Owning Mahoney, which is a Philip Seymour Hoffman TV movie.
I haven't seen that.
Where I haven't seen it either, but I'm familiar with it, where he plays a CIBC bank employee who embezzled something like $10 million for his gambling addiction, and it's about the trial of him stealing from CIBC.
Oh, I love that. Yes, that's like exactly the kind of movie I was like, I feel like we're missing that. Oh, I should go watch that. That's cool.
Yeah.
I like the closest I thought of was Cosmopolis, because they do touch on that, but it's not really about like Toronto specifically, like a Toronto Bay Street thing specifically. It's more of just corporate greed stuff, but yeah. And that's sort of the case a lot with David Cronenberg's films. They're shot in Toronto. They use Toronto's location, but it's not really the same way as what we're talking about Turning Red, where Toronto is a character. Absolutely.
Greetings, we're Technically a Conversation, a podcast for curious people by curious people.
Every week, we take turns presenting a new topic, and the other host has no idea what the topic will be.
We strive to educate in a way that's loose and fun. Our topics are all over the place, from light and funny to dark and sometimes spooky.
Some of the topics we've covered include urban legends, civil rights activists, vampires, pop culture icons, the supernatural and occult, spies and espionage, science and astronomy, and other weird and random things.
If any of these topics interest you, give our podcast a shot. Listen and subscribe at technicallyaconversation.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Parental advisory, we might use strong language.
So the next movie I want to talk about, we mentioned it off the top, of being proudly Toronto and very out and out visible Toronto, would be Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I absolutely adore this movie. I've seen it countless times. I've seen it so many times that I didn't even need to rewatch it in preparation for this episode. It is one of my all-time favorites. I once went to a screening where beforehand I got to meet Edgar Wright, Brian Lee O'Malley, the comic book artist, and some of the actors as well, got their autographs, and then went to a screening of it at what is Hot Doc Cinema now. I believe at the time, was it still Bloor Street Cinema? I can't remember. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
I think it was. I don't think it was Hot Docs yet.
Okay, yeah, it must have still been Bloor Street Cinema. And it was one of the most fun experiences I ever had, and I absolutely adore it. And Edgar Wright loves this city too, and he's always, tweeting about it, how much he loves it. Every time he's in town, he talks about his favorite spots that he goes to, or he'll check things out, and he'll post pictures, and everything about this movie just gives me the warm and fuzzies, and I love talking about it. What is your relationship to this movie?
I have to admit, I like this movie, and I do enjoy seeing the references from this movie. I do not have the affinity for it that, like, the bulk of people I know do. And it's not to say that I don't like it. Like, I do genuinely like the movie, but I don't have, like, the warm and fuzzies from it that I notice other people have. And it could be potentially because, like, when this movie came out, it was, they're talking about, kind of being student age, university age / mid-20 age in Toronto. And even though it's like around that time, that would have been my age group, I wasn't in Toronto during that stage of my life. Like, I went to university out in Kingston, and then I ended up moving away for the majority of my 20s, like outside of Canada. So I didn't really, I think, experience this Toronto as much. Like, when I would come home, it would be like for maybe a couple months or like a month at a time kind of thing. So maybe that's why I don't really get the same nostalgia pull from it from other people in our age group. But I do love it. Like, and I like that Edgar Wright, kind of similar to Guillermo del Toro, who we mentioned earlier. It's like they have such a love for this city, considering they're not from here. Like David Cronenberg, he is like a very Toronto guy. But Edgar Wright and Guillermo del Toro, these guys, like, they just love coming to the city and filming here, and showing off the city, which I really appreciate. And Scott Pilgrim's such a great one. Like I was saying, Toronto doesn't have too many movies where it's used, the city is used for the city. And I think the biggest shame of that is, unlike places like New York or London, we don't really have that cinematic visual preservation of the city, like of different times, because obviously, like every city, Toronto is adapting and changing all the time. So a lot of the stuff that you see in Scott Pilgrim doesn't exist anymore, right? Like, it's just not there anymore. And it's nice to have these movies where it is, even though it's obviously fictional and all that kind of stuff, it's nice to have that. Like, and New York has like a massive history of so many movies that show off the city from decade to decade to decade. And you can see the vibe of the city change. You can see the landmarks change and things like that. Toronto doesn't have as many. And I think Scott Pilgrim is one of the best examples of that, because it really, really does show Toronto through the eyes of like youth, right? Like students and 20 somethings, and what they're going to see and going to do in Toronto. And I would say, like, we're going to talk about the F word in a bit, but I'd say like the two of them do a very, very good job of preserving Toronto during that time period. Yeah.
So Scott Pilgrim came out in 2010, but it's based around, about the 2005 to 2007 era. And even though it was only like 5 to 3 year time difference, several of the locations used in this movie had to be recreated because they just didn't exist anymore. It's such a crazy situation where you're talking about, like, you talk about how so many movies have been shot in New York, and so you can see the difference. Think about just something like Times Square. You can watch, something like Taxi Driver and see what, Times Square looked like in the 1970s. And then you watch something, I can't even think of something off the top of my head, New Year's Eve, where, it takes place, the New Year's Eve times, the ball dropping in Times Square and stuff like that, and how completely different they look. It seems like every major movie uses a sequence that takes place in Times Square if the movie takes place in New York, and you can sort of see the evolution of it.
I think of Vanilla Sky when Tom Cruise runs through the empty Times Square. Like, that's a nice visual.
I've never seen that one, so I can't comment on it.
Never seen Vanilla Sky? It's not that great.
No.
I don't know why I'm so shocked. Sorry. It's not the greatest. But it's funny, like, if you look at our version of Times Square, like Toronto's version of Times Square, the Dundas Square area, like, that looks completely different. Like, it's funny. So, like, my mom doesn't really go downtown a lot, and I took her downtown. It sounds like I'm like taking her on a field trip, but I went downtown with her and she was looking around. I was like, it looks completely different to the last time she went downtown, which was maybe like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. And so it's like within very short periods of time, Toronto is a city that I think sometimes to its detriment, it doesn't really like to keep its history as much, which is a bit of a shame. And so what ends up being is like just everything changes and it looks completely different. And one of the great things about Scott Pilgrim in that time period, it's like there were so many more, I think, distinctive things about Toronto that are kept in there versus now there's like a Shoppers Drug Mart on every corner. Tim Hortons are everywhere. Like there's, you talk about Bloor Street Cinema. It's like all the cinemas nowadays it's just a Cineplex, right? Like there are very few independent cinemas that exist. And if they do, they are in Toronto, downtown Toronto. So it's nice, like I said, like to have a movie like Scott Pilgrim that does show those things, and it just preserves the city in a way that, we would otherwise would need to rely on people's pictures and videos and things like that. So it's kind of nice to see. And like, again, Edgar Wright really, really shows the city off. Like he doesn't just use the city as like a background thing. Like you were saying, Toronto is very much so a character in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just sort of reminds me so much of my youth because after I graduated from college in 2009, I lived somewhere else. I was still kind of in the neighborhood. And then my next place after that was down in Koreatown, which is basically right next to where a bulk of this movie takes place. Bathurst in Bloor and Bathurst area. There are several key landmarks that are in there between the Bathurst and Spadina intersections. You've got like Honest Ed's you can see in the background, the Pizza that's right there. I've spent numerous times drunk in that Pizza specifically. The original location of Sonic Boom, which is right next to what is now Hot Docs, is now a Dollarama. I had only been into that Sonic Boom, I think, once or twice when it was in that location before it moved around the corner, where part of the Honest Ed's block, which has now been torn down, and I don't know if it's done yet, but when I left, in the process of being turned into condos, and so many other things. Like the school that Knives goes to is St. Michael's College, which I also used to live around the corner from that. That's more St. Clair and Bathurst, St. Clair and Bathurst. So a little bit farther north. Casa Loma, the steps at Casa Loma. All that sort of stuff is just so much reminiscent of my early 20s through my mid to late 20s. And, there's a big climactic scene in Lee's Palace. I've been there so many times for concerts. I can't even count how many times I've been there and seen so many great acts. I absolutely love the geography of this movie. And so watching it is always just sort of the, like, I don't know, a wink to myself being like, yeah, I've been there. I've hung out there. I've been drunk in that location. I've passed out there before. I've done this there before. I've done that. And, I've gone on dates there, whatever it is. So I think that's one of the reasons why I love it so much, because it's not treated as I don't know, like, we have to set the movie here because this is where the comic books is. It's done with such love and affinity by the whole cast and crew. You could tell that they took real painstaking care to make it as accurate as possible. I was watching a video to sort of see some of the filming locations, and some of them I didn't even realize that they filmed at. Like, they filmed at Artscape Witchwood Barns. I used to live nearby that too. I didn't know that they filmed a scene there. Yeah, that's the scene where Scott goes and fights the ex-girlfriend of Ramona, where they have that fight, and both Ramona and Scott have an argument, and then he has to fight, I think her name is Roxy, where they have their fight where he can't hit a girl.
I think like Scott Pilgrim is literally a movie that was made for our generation. And I think particularly for you, like as being like a young guy in Toronto, and you're also like into music. And I think Scott Pilgrim does a really good job of showing the Toronto music scene decently well. And it's like I feel like it makes sense to me that you would have such a love for the film, because it seems like a movie that is almost like literally made for you, like for you and like people like you. So I think
feels like
and I think that's amazing, because again, Toronto people don't normally have that. I call it a luxury, but it's not really a luxury, is it? It's just a thing. Like, we don't really get that, which is why I think people from Toronto get so, when something is set in Toronto, they're like, oh my God, that's from Toronto. Like, we're really eager to claim those things because you just don't see it very often.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's sort of move on to another movie that is from a similar era, and that is The F Word, which was directed by Michael Dowse.
I'm going to give you my number. We should hang out.
Yeah.
My boyfriend will be worried about what happened to me. So, friends?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
Friends. Is this always how you make friends? Like it's a business deal?
Yeah, actually, it's just my style.
Okay, it's quite unnerving, but it's good.
So, Wallace, we should talk about the complex issues of our time. Can men and women really be friends, or do you secretly want to bang Chantry?
She has a boyfriend.
I had never seen this movie before. I've had a few people really recommend it to me. I'm not a big rom-com kind of guy, but every once in a while there's a rom-com that I think really hits the sweet spot, and I would liken it sort of to other genre films where there's sometimes just a lot of crap, and the people that are fans of it will watch anything and everything from that genre, but every once in a while you'll get this really great one where regardless of the genre, it's just a good movie. And I watched this, and I was so pleasantly surprised what a great movie this was, and how much Toronto also sort of played a key part in this. And it's so weird seeing a movie that stars Daniel Radcliffe as a movie about Toronto. I was just so blown away by how funny and heartfelt this movie was, and how it didn't fall victim to the usual tropes of a film of this style would. And also some just like really great performances. It was funny watching Adam Driver, who plays Daniel Radcliffe's best friend in the movie, basically playing his character from Girls, which I noticed. But yeah, there's a lot of really great things to love about this movie. Had you seen this one before?
I hadn't. I'd heard about it, and very kind of coincidentally, a friend of mine recently watched it like last week and was like, you should watch this movie. You'd really like it. And then ended up being one that we decided to pick for this episode. But I, like, similar to you, I'm not the biggest rom-com fan, although, I mean, we could make a really good argument that it's not that we don't like rom-coms, we just don't like bad movies.
Yes.
And it just happens that a lot of rom-coms aren't great. But I think as a genre, like, if you can do it right, then it's a good movie. Like, a good movie is a good movie. I don't care what genre it's coming from. And the F Word's nice. Like, it's a very sweet movie. And, you know, we talked about diversity within Turning Red. We were talking about that there. But, you know, seeing Daniel Radcliffe in Toronto, like, it's not odd to find British people. Like, I know he's white, and so that's not the kind of diversity we're talking about. But, like, if we're talking about, like, national diversity, and just the fact that Toronto is a city that a lot of people from other countries, like, there's a lot of Irish people, a lot of British people, you know, a lot of Europeans come here. And live for however long for school, or, you know, and then they get a job here or something like that. So I like that. And I really liked Adam Driver's performance as well. He was really, really funny in it. And I never watched Girls, so I've only ever known Adam Driver as the very serious, dramatic actor. So it was kind of nice seeing him be very, very funny. And I think he should do more comedy, because he's quite good. But yeah, I really enjoyed the movie, and similar to Scott Pilgrim, it shows the city off really nicely, and like in a different part of the city too. They're out in East Chinatown quite a bit, and they go to Scarborough Bluffs and that kind of thing. So that's kind of nice, like to see different parts of the city as well.
Yeah, I so much of watching these movies, my notes just were me writing down what landmarks I recognize or things like that. And the first thing that popped out, this movie opens with a title sequence, and there's a bit of a montage. You see streetcars and different parts of the city and whatnot. But then the opening scene is at this party, and the first thing I recognized was a yellow strip of paper on the fridge. Did you notice that?
I didn't. A yellow strip.
It is a Toronto parking
ticket. Like a transfer?
Ticket.
Oh, a parking ticket.
I've gotten a few of those.
That's hilarious, actually. Oh, I didn't notice that on the fridge. That's so funny.
Yeah, it was just one of those absolutely unmistakable things where it's just like, parking ticket.
I got one recently that they put in the handle of my car.
The handle?
Like,
wow.
Not on the windshield. Like, they shoved it into, like, the door. I was really annoyed by it. But anyway.
Really? That's weird.
Yeah. That's funny though. I didn't notice that. I should go back and check that out. That's really funny.
Yeah, it was there on the fridge of, I guess that's supposed to be Adam Driver's house. Which is, I'm pretty sure, just a frat house, because I definitely recognize the exterior of that where it looked like a U of T frat house.
You would recognize a frat house, wouldn't you? You'd be like, oh yeah, I've been there.
Maybe. I don't know what that says about me, but
broing out in the frat houses.
My prom after party was at a U of T frat house.
Are you serious? That's really funny.
Yep. This frat house ordered us kegs and a bunch of other alcohol and stuff like that. So we paid, I don't know how much it was, $10-20 to get in, and we got
how
free
did
booze.
How did that even come about? Like, what, did somebody know somebody in the frat house?
They must have.
That's funny. I don't even know.
It's just so weird to think about that these guys who were probably, I don't know, between 18 and 22 decided to host a party for a bunch of 17-year-olds.
That is actually, it's good, like, economics. Why not make some money from it?
Right.
That's really funny though. I can't, I'm trying to remember where we had I think it was probably just at someone's house. I don't think it was definitely wasn't at a frat house. I can say that. I'm safe certainty that it was not at a frat house.
But it was really cool in this movie to see stuff like the Royal Cinema that's in Little Italy.
Yeah.
Speaking of Little Italy, I've been
Still there
several times. Yeah, it's one of the last few independent theaters, and they do a ton of great work in the community and for aspiring filmmakers, showing films that literally nowhere else in the city will show them. And it was so nice that they went there for a screening. And they went to go see Princess Bride, wasn't it?
Yeah, Princess Bride.
Yeah, which is pretty funny. But
it's very in keeping with like the indie cinemas, because the indie cinemas here don't, like, they'll show something like, Worst Person in the World or like Aftergang, like those smaller movies that Cineplex might not pick up on it.
Yeah.
But they're typically, what they're showing is like old movies from way back when. I know the Review Cinema out in Roncy, they were just doing Batman, the 1989 Batman. So it's very, very like in keeping with what that kind of theater would be showing.
Yeah. But there's plenty of other great, landmarks. Speaking of something like Turning Red, you get to see Chinatown quite a bit. Like you said, they went out to the Scarborough Bluffs specifically. Is it not Cherry Beach? No, that is. What's that beach called?
Honestly, I don't know.
I don't remember.
I just go there.
Yeah.
It's out on the east bay. Yeah.
Yeah, where I had only gone there, I think, the year before. I think it was during the pandemic. Maybe it was. I don't remember. Yeah, it was during the pandemic. My wife and I went out there on my birthday, I think, and we kind of had a little picnic on the beach. And it was my first time going out there. And it's like, how did it take me this long to come out to this beautiful beach? And so I know exactly what part of the water they were at where they went skinny dipping.
I'll say Toronto's a really funny city. Like, the surrounding areas of Toronto is really funny, that if you grew up on the West End, you know nothing about the East End, and vice versa. Like, a friend of mine, her husband grew up in Mississauga. She's from Vancouver, but like her husband grew up in Mississauga, and they were in Markham and trying to find somewhere to eat, and they had to like look up on their phone where to go and like how to get there. And she was like, "Aren't you guys like, how do you not know like what is here?" And he's like, "I never come here." And I said to her, I was like, it's the same thing. If I went out to Mississauga, which is out west, I would 100% need my GPS on and I wouldn't know. And like you said, like Scarborough Bluffs wasn't very common to you. Like I've been going to Scarborough Bluffs my whole life, basically, because I live on the east side of Toronto, on the east end of Toronto. So, yeah, like it's funny. Toronto's a really weird city like that, where it's not really big, but we are very stuck on our sides. And we don't really, when we venture out to the other side, it's a thing. It's like, oh, like you said, like you went there for your birthdays. It's like an occasion that you went to Scarborough Bluffs. Whereas like I was just there last weekend to go for a little jaunty walk. Yeah.
And then I think my biggest bone to pick with this movie is this is a movie that takes place in Toronto. And I looked it up. The director is from London, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Why, not once, but twice, were characters wearing Montreal Canadiens t-shirts?
Listen, sometimes the people want to.
I don't know. Once is an
people
accident.
want to root for a team that like has won something in the last 30 some odd years. Okay,
Rachel,
now
you're not even a hockey fan. I'm not
I'm not.
gonna listen to whatever jibber jabber you have to say about the Leafs. Okay.
You know what's funny though? I will say, like, I'm not a hockey person, but because I don't like the Leafs, if you told me to pick a team to root for, it's always been the Montreal Canadiens, because that story, the hockey sweater, which is a very famous Canadian children's story. And it's about like a family in Montreal, and like the kid gets a Toronto Leafs, a Maple Leafs sweater from Eaton's, which is very cute. And he like hates it. He hates it so much because he's like, no, I want the Canadiens. And I think from that book, it made me be like, I'm a Canadiens fan. If you told me I had to root for a team, it's going to be Montreal. So maybe the people in those people are the same as me. And they're just like, we're going to be contrarians and we're going to root for Montreal of all teams.
I have no idea. I didn't look too deeply into it. The only thing I can imagine is maybe the directors, despite being from London, maybe either went to school in Montreal or has family from Montreal and is just a fan of them. But yeah, I noticed it at first. It was early on in the movie. Daniel Radcliffe's nephew was wearing a Habs t-shirt. I was like, oh, interesting. That's a little odd.
Yeah.
I'm like, I get it. You know what? They're from England. You know, they don't understand the difference between the Toronto-Montreal rivalry, whatever. And then at the very end of the movie, when Adam Driver and his wife are telling Daniel Radcliffe that they're expecting a child, he is wearing a Canadian shirt. I was like, no, once is an accident, twice is on purpose. What is going on here? And I tried to do a little bit of research, and I couldn't figure out what the deal is with this, but I was not pleased.
I think you're overestimating how many people who live in Toronto are from here who do not like the Leafs. Like, I think you're really underestimating that.
I don't know. I think I have a pretty rightful gripe, but whatever.
If they were wearing, you can fill me in here on like hockey. I know Toronto and Montreal is like that's the big rivalry. What if they were wearing Sens stuff, like Ottawa Senators jerseys and sweaters and stuff like that? Would you be as upset, like not upset, but like would you be as like annoyed by it, or is it because specifically it's Montreal, or sorry, Montreal, or is it just because it's not a Toronto team?
Well, Montreal is our biggest rival.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it'd be like if they're wearing Boston, I'd be equally disgusted. If they were wearing Ottawa, I'd be like, why the hell are they wearing Ottawa shirts? Who wears an Ottawa shirt? Like, what is wrong with them?
And Brody might have something to say about that.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, Brody. I'm not really. You know, you try making fun of me and more than enough for being a Leafs fan, so I'm not really apologizing. But come on, would you not be equally confused of like, why are they wearing Senators gear? Who likes the Senators? At least with the Montreal, it elicits some sort of emotion, whereas the Senators would be confusion.
My guess I would just honestly guess that they're Montreal fans, or maybe the costume designer is a Montreal fan and was like, we're not putting the Leafs in here. It's not
something.
Happening.
It was just so funny that it's a movie about Toronto and they put 2 Montreal Canadiens t-shirts in the movie, which, like, I don't know, that, like, was there no one along the way that was like, hold up guys, what's the deal with this?
I'm going to say, Dakota, when you go back to edit this, I want you to do like a counter of how many times you say Toronto. I think you're going to be really surprised.
I'm so mad at you right now.
It's really funny to me.
I'm just going to ignore you. One of the other key locations in this movie is the George Street Diner. I'm not familiar with it, but I looked it up, and I definitely know that area pretty well. I'm surprised, but apparently it's quite a popular little diner. But it was just sort of cool that they incorporated so many little details to what the city is like. I
really like the George Street Diner. Sorry, I had to pause my mic for a second. I was coughing. I really like the George Street Diner. It is a tough spot to get a seat. Like Sunday mornings, Saturday mornings.
It's so tiny.
It's very tiny, but it has like, I don't know, it's like the greasy spoon kind of thing where, especially as Toronto continues its progression of being, I don't even know what kind of city, but you don't get this type of breakfast, brunch, lunch kind of spot anymore because now it's all very trendy and like very fancy foods. Whereas this is just your basic breakfast, and it's nice and it's really good food. But it is very tiny. You're right. It's quite tiny. So it's tough to get a spot there. But if you do, it's delicious and well worth the wait, I think. Depends on how long.
It sort of reminded me a little bit of something like Vesta Lunch on DuPont Street.
Yeah, kind of. It's like, and
it's
that
like narrow row of just like greasy spoon diner,
which is nice. Like we just don't see that very often anymore, right? Like when a new spot, like a new brunch spot is created, like it's always like you and I could just like write what we think a typical brunch spot would be, and we would probably have like the exact same kind of elements to it because that's just what a brunch spot is today. So it's nice when you see something a little bit more old school. And they tend to probably have better food as well. Just saying.
Yeah, especially the type of food if like you've been drinking the night before and you're just like, I need a lot of hash browns, a lot of bacon, really runny eggs, and toast. Something like that.
Something really greasy, and then, like you said, the toast to sop it all up, and then like diner style coffee, which is just
where you have your server come by every 10 minutes to fill your coffee cup up.
Yeah, exactly. None of this cortado nonsense with like oat milk and crap like that. It's just coffee. It's just normal coffee.
Now, I want to pivot a little bit. We were talking about this idea of the city sort of changing and not really sure what it's changing into. And I think a movie that captures this very well was a documentary that we both watched called The Stairs. And it was something that I had never heard of before. And you had sent me a article from the Globe and Mail about the 20 best Toronto movies ever made. And I'm going to link to it in the show notes because it's a fantastic article. And a lot of the movies we're talking about today and the ones that I mentioned in the introduction are all sort of on this list. And this is a documentary directed by Hugh Gibson. And it's sort of like this really intimate look at several people that live in Regent Park, and they're dealing with addiction, mental health issues, living on the streets, working in prostitution and things like that. And I don't think I've never seen anything like this about Toronto. So right off the bat, it was so original. I've never seen this. But on the same side, it is something that I thought was so necessary because Toronto isn't just, a pleasant stroll through Chinatown or going to Lee's Palace for a concert or, getting drunk in the Pizza at Bloor and Bathurst. There is a lot of marginalized and forgotten people in the city. And watching this movie made me happy that it existed, but also so profoundly sad. And I thought what was most interesting is throughout this film, basically, instead of doing establishing shots, it would cut between scenes of showing construction being done of tearing down buildings and new development signs and construction crews, which is basically showing the slow, you can call it gentrification, revitalization, building new stuff, getting rid of the old, making way for the new, whatever you want to call it. But whatever it is, it has an impact on people that are showcased in this movie. And And it's something that is always sort of tough to deal with. And, you don't want to be the person that's like, no, change is bad. Change is great. Change is very good. It's useful. But then you also have to realize, but at what cost? And how is it going to affect not just yourself and the people you know, but the people you forget about and the people that you see and you wonder, what is their story? How did they end up in these situations? And I'm so glad that that you sort of pushed for this one. One of the things that I want to highlight was the fact that we were making a list of what movies to talk about, and you want to make sure that we touched on something that included a look of people on color. And Turning Red is great for looking at the Chinese-Canadian experience, but The Stairs is great for looking at, in general, people of color who are often marginalized and forgotten about. And so I really want to thank you for putting this on my radar.
Yeah, I think it's very necessary, like you said, to have a film about Toronto that isn't the hipster cafes. It isn't the music scene. It isn't, a nice little family that lives in Chinatown. It's not like that, because I think one of the things that I wouldn't just say it's a Toronto thing, but I think Canadians in general, sometimes we can get a bit uppity and a bit smug especially when we compare ourselves to the Americans. Like, we look and we go, there's not as much violence, particularly gun violence in our country. There's not as much, we always like to think we're not as racist. We're not as, heartless as Americans are. It's a cleaner country. There's all these things that Canadians for a very long time have prided themselves on. And the fact is and I think in the last couple of years in particular, we've had a bit of a shift in that attitude, because for as great as Canada is, and it is a great country, I'm not bashing the country at all. I think it's a fantastic country, and especially on a world scale, I would rather live in Canada than the vast majority of other countries in the world. And I'm lucky. It's just luck that you and I, we were born here, right? It just happens that we ended up being Canadian. But the fact is there are a lot of communities all across the country, but in particular in a city like Toronto, that, like you said, they're forgotten about, and they get left behind in the immense amount of condos that are being built across the city right now. You mentioned Honest Ed's getting torn down, and if you're not from Toronto or you're too young to remember what Honest Ed's was, it was like a discount, not a supermarket, but it was like a discount place where you could just buy really cheap stuff, and
discount
it was perfect.
Department store.
Yeah, discount department store. It was a great place for new immigrants to buy things, for students to buy stuff. But also people, just low-income individuals, to get things. And the fact that they're tearing it down to build a luxury condo that, the 1%, I hate to say it, sounds a bit cheesy these days to call it like that, but not many people are going to be able to afford to buy that condo, to rent that condo even. And that's a thing that is endemic across the entire city. And one thing that I've noticed in the past few years in particular, and COVID definitely exacerbated the situation, but the homeless issue in Toronto is getting incredibly bad. It was always there, and it was never too hidden, but it's definitely gotten worse and worse and worse as the years have gone by, which you could say that that's because the city is getting bigger or more populated, but it's not the right trajectory to go. And I think what The Stairs does so well is it focuses on three people in general, but it just it's representative rather of, people who are drug users, people who were sex workers, and the thing that Hugh Gibson does such a great job is it's not done in a judgmental way. There's no leering either. It's not poverty porn. It's not judging their decisions, and it's a very frank and open discussion, which each of the people in each of the subjects of the film. There's one of the guys, his name is Greg, and he's just very open about the fact, I like smoking crack. I get that it's bad for me, but hey, I enjoy it. And it talks, about having safe injection sites. That's kind of what it's alluding to in that. And it's, I think some people might not be comfortable accepting the fact that a city like Toronto that does have all those nice and fancy things. And, I mean, within where Regent's Park is, like, you can just go a little bit north and you got Yorkville, right? And that's one of the wealthier areas of the city. And there are tons of people who just be like, I'll just ignore what's going on at Regent's Park. And, I don't go there. That's not my day to day, and think that that's okay. But the fact is it's, you're a city, you're a whole community of people. And there are a lot of people that are really, really struggling. And I think the fact that this film exists is incredible. And it did really well when it was released. It was released back in 2016. But it did really, really well when it came out. Like, it won a ton of awards, and it got a lot of recognition, a lot of great reviews. And it's a fantastic movie that I'm sure you could probably link it. It's if you're in Canada, it's available on TVO on their website for free. So I would highly recommend people watch it, because it's just, we can bask in how fun Toronto can be for people with money or whatever. But, there's a lot of sadness and darkness to the city as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually worked for a time in that area right before the pandemic hit. I was working for a company where, if you really want to figure it out, I'm sure people could. We had several offices in the Carlton and Parliament area. And so I was working there. And then while I was there in my tenure, they shifted their office down to Queen East in Parliament, which is just a few minutes south. And so this whole movie basically is that neighborhood. And I have walked up and down those streets to get to the subway stations, to get to work, to get to wherever I need to be in that area, different meetings that I had. It was shocking being able to sort of see inside the buildings that I knew so well. The one in particular, I'm pretty sure the stairwell that Marty slept in, that he showed at the very beginning of the movie, and he was like, oh, and this is my living room, and this is my bathroom, and this is my dining room. Oh, look, someone's already peed in the stairs, I forgot to clean up, sort of thing. And it's all very ha 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 sort of thing. If the exterior matches the inside, what I believe it is, I've walked by that so many times. And during my time that I was working for this company, they started demolishing these buildings. And it's just sort of every Marty that possibly used this building as a safe place to hide out, that lived there because they had nowhere else to live, that whatever the situation was, now aren't living there. Where are they now? Where are they moved to? Because that's often the problem is, every time, a building like that gets torn down, it creates sort of this shuffling of the deck, where it's just like, okay, now it's someone else's problem. Now you have to go find somewhere else to live. Now you have to find somewhere else to sleep at night. And it's sort of this very tragic shuffle where NIMBYism also comes in places. Yeah, we'd love to have a homeless shelter, just not in my neighborhood, okay? And anytime a building like this, where it's presumably mostly low-income people, housing projects, things like that, you're going to, unfortunately, cause a lot of disbursement. And then what happens? And who is being hurt by this? Who is not benefiting anymore from having a roof over their head? And you're watching this movie, and more often than not, you realize these people are, there's a scene where, what was the other gentleman's name again?
Greg.
Where, he's dealing with this court case, and you think he's going to lose his job or something like that. And you're just like, okay, and then what happens when he loses his job? Or Marty, when, he gets into a fight with someone and they're, saying, call the cops, fire this man. What happens when he loses his job? This apartment that he works so hard for, and he's able to go out and buy these, Bob Marley t-shirts and sneakers that he loves so much. What happens then? And it's that's sort of the most tragic thing. And I don't know if I like or dislike. At the end of this movie, I was really hoping for some title cards of
me too.
What happened.
Yes.
What happened next?
Yeah.
I
thought
what
there
happened
were
with this court case.
I think Marvel has conditioned our brains a little bit too. I was like sitting there waiting, and I was like, maybe it'll come after the credits. And I was like, that's stupid. Why would that happen in a film like this?
Yeah.
But I completely agree with you.
It's a documentary thing. Most documentaries, when they're dealing with subject matter like this, they'll be like, oh, and then this happened to this person. Tragically, this person ended up dying, sort of thing. Where it's just like, I needed a little bit of closure of what was happening after this, because this so much was a in-the-moment slice of life documentary, even though it was shot over 5 years.
Absolutely. And one thing I loved about the film as well was showing, everybody has certain, I think, preconceived notions of what a drug user looks like, what a prostitute looks like, and what their life looks like, and the kind of person that they are. And I think what the movie does so well is it shows a lot of humanity behind our own biases and our own judgments. And I like the idea that Roxanne, who's the third subject of the film, she was a sex worker and now she's a social worker. And she doesn't speak of her time working as a sex worker as in any shame or anything like that. It was more of just well, this is the job that I had. Just as we all have had different jobs in our lives, and then Greg and Marty both working at the community service areas of helping homeless people and helping drug users. And I like that it was showing kind of the other end of the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess you could say, but also the fact that they're still dealing with addiction, that they are still using. It isn't necessarily just saying you have to be completely clean or completely sober. You know what I mean? I enjoyed that they had that insight. And one thing you were saying that I found really interesting is the idea of the not in my neighborhood. Again, we talk about the movies that we've already discussed in this episode. And it's Toronto is a fairly liberal city. It's a fairly left-leaning city. And everybody here will say, of course we have to help the homeless people. Of course we have to help drug users. Of course we have to help, sex workers, and to get them on their feet and, put a roof over their head and food on their table. Of course we want all that. But the second that you tell them, well, okay, so we're going to build, we're going to put a safe injection site next to your building, then it becomes oh, does it have to be here? Can't we put it somewhere else? You know what I mean? And I think a city like Toronto does have that contradiction. And I think it's important that it's highlighted. And I mean, the fact, that movie 6 years ago now, right? The Stairs it came out in 2016. It started filming back in 2011. So over a decade now. And not much has changed. If anything, things kind of got worse in a sense. And I already said, COVID kind of affected that, but it's a shame that it's not just it hasn't changed, but it hasn't gotten better either.
Yeah, absolutely. I moved during the pandemic, so I don't know what it's like, and I stopped working in that neighborhood, but I can't imagine that it was a beneficial moment in time for that community.
Yeah.
Now, while I keep going on, we'll sort of very briefly touch on two other movies we've covered extensively on this show. We did an entire A24 retrospective about Enemy, the Denis Villeneuve film that takes place in Toronto. I originally kind of wanted to leave this off the list completely because we did an entire episode. You can go back and you can listen to that, and we talk about filming locations in Toronto, in Mississauga, and what that was like. But I figured we sort of very briefly touch on it here. It's great that this sort of falls in the category of maybe something like a David Cronenberg film where they utilize Toronto as a city, but it's not really a character in sort of the same way that some of these other movies utilize the city.
I will actually not completely counter that, but because I do agree with you. But one thing that I like that Denis Villeneuve did in this movie was, the movie has a big spider thing in it, which I know you really enjoy. And it's I love that they kept using shots of the streetcar cables that are just all over this. And for me, that's a very, very distinctive Toronto thing. The fact that we still have stupid streetcars, but they are helpful. But the fact those wires and the cables overhead, that is such a Toronto thing. And to use it artistically to kind of go with the spider theme. I always thought that was really, like, that's always been one of my favorite things about the movie being shot in Toronto, was because it is like a spider thing. And they very cleverly was like, we're going to use the streetcar stuff or the cables, because it does look like a spider web.
They look like spider webs.
Yeah. And I like that. And it's cool. Like we talk all the movies that we've talked about. I think what's neat about the movies that we selected is it shows a different part of Toronto. And I think what Enemy does cool is, like, it does look at some bits of the downtown core, like right near, like, I think they use some like on Victoria Street and like that kind of thing. But it goes over to Mississauga. It goes over to UTSC, which is in Scarborough. And I think that's nice. Like, it just kind of shows the expanse of Toronto and how many different, we might not have the same variety that like a Vancouver has in terms of landscape, but like there are many different pockets of the city that can be used in a film. And I think Enemy does a good job of kind of looking at almost a bit more of the GTA part of Toronto.
Yeah. I guess I would probably walk back my statements a little bit, because there are numerous establishing shots showing the city as a whole, where you see the whole skyline and things like that.
The poster too, it has that is like the complete Toronto skyline, isn't it? With on Jake Gyllenhaal's head.
In Jake Gyllenhaal's profile of his head, it shows it like overlaid on top of that. It's just not done in a way similar to something like Turning Red or Scott Pilgrim, or even The F Word, where they're sort of name dropping these things. It was just like, hey, if you know, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I mean that's very like kind of in the style of Denis. Like we both really like Denis Villeneuve as a director, and it's like for him to do something like Scott Pilgrim, like that'd be weird. That's not a Denis kind of movie. Whereas like Edgar Wright would be a bit more kind of driven that way, whereas Denis would be a bit more, I suppose, artistic about it.
Which they're different styles, and those movies need those different styles in order for them to work properly, and it worked out nicely.
And like I already brought up Guillermo del Toro like maybe a couple times now, but like he uses the city in a very different way as well than Edgar Wright did, than Denis Villeneuve did. And I really like
Toronto's
that.
basically become his filming home base of the last like several films that he's done.
I think he lives in Toronto too. I think he like bought a house.
He does have a home here,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
There. I'm not there anymore. But I want to move on and touch on one other movie we have covered extensively on the show, and that is Scarborough, which is another great Canadian film that sort of showcases a little bit different side of it. You know, a lot of these movies we're talking about Toronto, we're talking about the downtown core, the original city of Toronto before amalgamation happened in, what was that, 1998, 1999, whenever that happened, when Etobicoke and East York and Scarborough and all the different parts of the outer region of Toronto became officially a part of the city of Toronto. And Scarborough is one of those regions where it is now a part of the city, despite the fact that it is very different from the downtown core. You don't have things like the financial district running across Bay Street, or, the downtown of Yonge and Dundas Square and things like that. It is much more, I don't want to say suburban, but it's just much more families living there, in mostly a lot of high-rise buildings and things like that, but is much more family, home-oriented, as opposed to the downtown, which is much more business-oriented. And continuing our sort of conversation of the Stairs shows people of color, and especially something that the Stairs doesn't do, also include Indigenous people that live in the city as well. And, there's some great, beautiful shots of Scarborough that really sort of showcase what that area of the city has to offer, even if it is sort of forgotten mostly by downtowners.
I think I would actually say I don't think it is forgotten by them. I think that they look at it and talk down on it quite a bit. Like there are people who, when you say you're from Scarborough, people are like, "Oh, Scarborough," like, "Oh, wow," or they like have a deep like, "What's it like over there?" Which is ridiculous. But, I like one thing Scarborough and the Stairs, and I think does really nicely, is they show community, which it's almost become a bit of a trope these days of when you show like low income neighborhoods and talk about the community and the strength that they have. And in terms of like relationships with one another, the way that like families will help each other out because they all know like they're all kind of in the same boat, right? Like, and they need to look out for one another. But it is something that, you know, is lost when you go out to the suburbs, like the actual proper suburbs. And even if you're downtown Toronto in like financial districts, like there's not really a sense of community in those areas. Like you're in your house, you don't really know your neighbors. You're in your condo, you have no idea who the hell your neighbors are. And whereas other places, they, you know, where maybe there's a bit more misfortune, there's a bit more hard luck. They do band together a lot more. And I always think that that's like a really nice bit. And I mean, we've talked about Scarborough on the show already, and I don't want to repeat myself too much, but it is a movie that it's like, I love that it exists. Like kind of in the same way that Turning Red, it exists. Like I like that Scarborough exists because that's a part of the city that has been reviled so much by people who live in the suburbs, who live in Toronto. Like I still know people who refuse to go to Scarborough because they're like, I don't want to get shot. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, it's not, you go in there, not that bad. Like, you know, so it's, so I like that they have a movie that shows the good and the bad. Like no place is perfect. And I think that, you know, Catherine Hernandez wrote this, the novel and she also wrote the script as well. And I think it's a beautiful love letter to Scarborough, to a place that tons of people don't want to be considered from Scarborough, they don't want to say that they live in Scarborough, even though it's ridiculously expensive to buy a house in Scarborough right now. But it's just a place that for a very, very long time was looked down upon, and I would argue still is looked down upon today. And I think it's nice that we have something that shows the city or the neighborhood, whatever you want to call it, in a positive light while taking the negative with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Very true. Now, speaking of Scarborough, a few shows ago on episode 185, 2022 Canadian Screen Award nominations, we looked at the movies up for the most prestigious awards given out to Canadian cinema, as we reviewed several of the movies there. The awards were broadcast on April 10th, with more of the awards being handed out during the week on live streams. We talked about how both Scarborough and Night Raiders led the pack with 11 nominations each. Now, the aftermath of that is Scarborough won big on that night and throughout the week, collecting 8 awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Sasha Nakai and Rich Williamson, Best Actor for Liam Diaz, Best Supporting Actress for Cherish Violet Blood, Best Adapted Screenplay for Catherine Hernandez, Best Casting, Best Sound Editing, and the John Dunning Award for Best First Feature. On the flip side there, Night Raiders won 6 awards, including Best Actress for El Magi Tailfeathers, Best Original Screenplay for Denis Goulet, Best Costume Design, Best Sound Mixing, Best Makeup, and Best Visual Effects. El Magi Tailfeathers also won an award for Best Documentary for The Meaning of Empathy. Other winners include Joshua Ojic from Wildhood winning Best Supporting Actor, Drunken Birds getting Best Cinematography, All My Puny Sorrows getting Best Editing and Best Original Score, and Learn to Swim getting Best Original Song. We managed to basically review all of those movies on that show, and you can go back and listen to it. I'll also link to that in the show notes. But what a great representation of Canadian cinema for the last year. I was very happy with how this all sort of shook out, and so many deserving people winning awards for their films. What are your sort of thoughts on this year's Canadian Screen Awards?
I love it. I mean, we've been kind of banging on about diversity, and I know that a lot of people kind of cringe at the idea when people talk about diversity now, because it's become a bit of a trendy thing to talk about. But if you look at the movies that were being honored, like not just the ones that won, but the ones that were nominated as well, like you're covering such a wide swathe of the country. And I think that that's really cool. Like the fact that we're not just looking at a particular, like the big cities, you know, we're not just looking at the big cities of Canada. It's not just the Montreals, the Torontos, the Vancouvers. You're looking at other parts of the country as well. And in different ways too. Like even when you do look at the city, you're looking at it through a different lens. So it was like really great year for Canadian film. I think there's some really cool things and some really great filmmakers to like keep an eye on that I think are going to continue to create. Cause for a lot of them, this was like their first movies, right? Like our first or second films. And it's incredible to think like what they're going to continue to create and achieve. as the years go on. And yeah, it's been like, I think you and I are just kind of lucky in the sense that we did watch so many of the movies from last year, Canadian movies from last year, and they are so good. Like, they are really, really good. And I know that in Canada, we're just so close to the States that sometimes we overlook Canadian cinema because, you know, Hollywood tends to take up the space at cinemas. But there are so many great creators in the country, and they're all worth checking out, and because they all have something a little bit different to offer. And it's really fun. Like, I hope that that's something that we've kind of emphasized in this episode, which is it's fun to see your city up on the screen, because we don't generally see that. So whether it's, you know, like Wildhood shows off, you know, Nova Scotia, and obviously we just talked about Scarborough, but it's like, it's cool that you get to see different parts of the country and different creators and voices from it. So yeah, well done to everybody. And it's really great Scarborough did so well too.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to trying to catch up with some new Canadian movies for this year. I know you had already sent me a screener link for Ash Grove, which is one that Matthew Simpson on Awesome Friday has been sort of championing as well. He's done a couple interviews and podcasts about that film. So shout out to him for doing his part and also promoting Canadian cinema. It's one of those things now where every festival I'm sort of like being like, all right, what looks like that's going to be the big Canadian movie this year?
Yeah, I think, like, I mean, Ash Grove is great. I also just want to say, you brought up Matthew. He has a really good blog post of a bunch of Canadian movies that he put up for Canadian, what is it called? National Canadian Film Day? Canadian National Film Day?
Yeah, that was a couple days ago.
Yeah, not too long ago. So he has a really, really great blog post of a bunch of different movies that you can catch up on and where to catch up on them as well.
Yeah, I must have missed that. I'm very sorry, Matt. I will check that out, and if I'll try to link to that in the show notes as well. I'm going to have a lot of links. Every once in a while, we have these shows where I'm just like, I've run out of character limits for links. But yeah, I'm very excited. This was a nice, fun episode to do, talking about Toronto and Canadian cinema. But I think that sort of wraps it up. You know, I think a good place, if you're interested in the movies that we're talking about, check out this Globe and Mail article that I'm going to link to in the show notes. There are 21 movies listed here in this 20 best Toronto set movies. And then there's a few others that are name dropped throughout it as well. And a really great, you know, learning ground of where to catch up on Canadian cinema, especially because more often than not, we look at Canadian cinema and go, oh, Canadian cinema. If it just means it's a cheap knockoff of an American movie sort of thing. But there are some really, truly fantastic films by some really creative and individual artists that should be checked out throughout the history, not just modern ones, but there are some great classics as well.
Definitely. I really enjoyed this one. This was really fun to do. We should do one for Vancouver now that you're over there.
Yeah, it's funny. I tried when thinking about this episode, I looked at Vancouver. There's a lot less movies set out in Vancouver. There are some that include like a single scene here, but not in the same way of Toronto. And even in the same way, you know, I was talking about it with Steph, and because she suggested the same thing, and I was like, Let me name you 5 Toronto set movies. After the first couple, they're going to be a lot more niche and not as well known.
Yeah.
Now imagine that for Vancouver, but starting at number 1.
I would actually, we were talking, like, probably we can take this offline, but it's like Montreal and Quebec in general, like French Canada has a ton of great, great films. And they are actually properly set in Quebec. So that might be something to do.
Yeah, I feel like I would need someone from there to sort of.
I was going to say, you and I are not from Quebec, so that would be, but that would be fun.
We both spent plenty of time there.
Yes, but that would be a fun one to do, like to get some French Canadian. Because actually, just as we were talking about the Screen Awards, I was looking through them. Like, there weren't as many French Canadian films up in the nominations as I thought there were. So yeah, they make a lot of really, really good movies over there.
Yeah, usually most of the best Canadian films do come from Quebec. But I think this wraps up our show. Rachel, where can listeners find you and more of your work?
Go to rachelkh.com, and I'm on Twitter at _RachelKH.
Excellent. You can follow this show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at contrazoompod, and let us know your favorite movie set in Toronto. Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. Thanks for checking us out.